The watch appeared on a Tuesday morning in late September. Claire found it on her kitchen counter, resting against the coffee maker like it had always belonged there, like it had been waiting for her to notice it. She stood in her bathrobe staring at it for a long time, steam rising from her untouched mug, the smell of coffee filling the small apartment, trying to remember if she had seen it the night before when she cleaned the counters. The watch was silver with a scratched face, the kind of damage that comes from years of wear, from a life lived with it strapped to a wrist day after day. Deep grooves marked the crystal, a network of fine lines that caught the morning light and scattered it. She did not own a watch. She checked her phone for the time like everyone else, had done so for years, could not remember the last time she had even thought about wearing a watch. But when she picked it up, the weight of it felt correct in her palm, familiar in a way that made her skin prickle with something between recognition and dread. She turned it over slowly and saw an engraving on the back, small neat letters worn smooth by time, initials she did not recognize, a date she could not place. The watch was still running. She could hear it ticking, a soft steady rhythm that seemed too loud in the quiet kitchen. She set it back down carefully and finished getting ready for work, telling herself she would figure it out later, that there was some explanation she was missing, some reasonable answer. Maybe it had been her grandmother's, passed down through family she had forgotten about. Maybe she had inherited it years ago and tucked it away and somehow it had ended up here. But her grandmother had been dead for 15 years and Claire remembered the estate sale, remembered walking through the empty house with her mother, remembered the hollow feeling of watching strangers buy up the remnants of a life. She remembered there had been nothing left to inherit, that everything of value had been sold or given away. She left the watch on the counter and went to work, pushing the strange discovery to the back of her mind, trying to focus on emails and meetings and the normal rhythm of her day. But it nagged at her, a small persistent worry. That night when she came home, the apartment was exactly as she had left it. Her coffee mug still in the sink, the morning newspaper still folded on the table, and the watch was still there, ticking quietly, patient. She stood in the doorway and stared at it. The ticking seemed louder now, or maybe it was just that she was listening for it. She walked over and picked it up again, held it to her ear, let the sound fill her head. It was steady, mechanical, reliable. She thought about throwing it away, dropping it in the trash and forgetting about it. But something stopped her. Some feeling she could not name. Instead, she opened the drawer by the refrigerator where she kept takeout menus and batteries and random things that did not have a proper place, and she put the watch inside and closed it. For 3 days she did not think about it. Or she tried not to. She went to work, came home, made dinner, watched television, lived her normal, unremarkable life. But sometimes in the quiet moments she would hear the ticking, faint but present, and she would know it was still there in the drawer, still running, still keeping time for a life that was not hers. On the 4th day she found the photograph. It was tucked into a book on her shelf, a paperback mystery she had read twice and kept because she liked the cover. She pulled the book down to reread it and the photograph fell out, fluttering to the floor like a leaf. The photograph was old, the colors faded into that particular yellow that happens to pictures from the 80s. The edges soft and worn as though someone had handled it many times. It showed a house she had never seen before, white clapboard with blue shutters, a small covered porch with a rocking chair, a lawn that needed mowing, a mailbox tilting slightly to one side. Ordinary suburban America, the kind of house that could have been anywhere. A woman stood on the porch, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun, her face turned slightly away from the camera. The woman was Claire. Or it looked like Claire. The same dark hair cut to shoulder length, the same narrow shoulders, the same way of standing with one hip cocked slightly to the left, weight on one foot. But Claire had never seen this house. Had never stood on that porch. Had never owned a dress like the one the woman in the photograph was wearing. A simple cotton sundress with small flowers, the kind of thing her mother might have worn but that Claire would never choose. She turned the photo over with trembling hands. On the back, in handwriting that might have been hers but was not quite right, were the words, "We were happy here," followed by a date she did not recognize. The handwriting had the same slant as hers, the same way of forming the letter E, but it was looser, more relaxed, as though whoever had written it had been more certain of themselves than Claire had ever been. Claire put the photograph back in the book and then immediately took it out again. She sat down on the floor of her living room and looked at it for a long time. The woman's face was slightly blurred, caught mid-movement or simply out of focus, turned at an angle that made it impossible to see her features clearly. But the resemblance was undeniable. The build, the posture, the hair, even the way the woman held her shoulders, it was all Claire. She thought about calling her mother, asking if there were family photos she had never seen, cousins or distant relatives she did not know about. But her mother would have told her. Her mother was meticulous about family history, about preserving memories, about explaining where everyone came from and how they were connected. Claire would have known if there had been an aunt or a cousin who looked exactly like her. She would have been told. She would have seen photographs before. She put the photograph in the drawer with the watch and closed it firmly. That night she could not sleep. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the building, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the old pipes settling. And underneath it all, so faint she thought she might be imagining it, the ticking of the watch in the kitchen drawer. She got up at 3 in the morning and stood in the kitchen in the dark, the drawer open, looking down at the watch and the photograph. She picked up the watch and held it, felt its weight, its solidity. She picked up the photograph and studied it again, looking for some clue, some explanation. The woman on the porch looked happy, or at least content. There was something in her posture, in the way she stood, that suggested ease, comfort, belonging. Claire could not remember the last time she had felt that way. The objects accumulated slowly over the following weeks, appearing one by one with no pattern she could discern, no warning. A week after the photograph, a key appeared on her bathroom sink. She came home from work and there it was, sitting on the white porcelain like it had materialized out of nowhere. She was certain it had not been there that morning. The key was old brass, heavy and solid, the kind that opened locks that did not exist anymore, the kind you might find in an antique store or history museum. The shaft was thick and the teeth were elaborate, complex. When she picked it up she felt a strange pulling sensation in her chest, a longing for something she could not name, a door she could not remember. The key seemed important. It seemed like it should open something that mattered. But she had no idea what. She added it to the drawer and tried not to think about it. Then there was a small wooden box, plain and unvarnished with a simple brass clasp, sitting on her bedside table one morning when she woke. She knew it had not been there when she went to bed. She had read for an hour before turning out the light, and the table had been empty except for her lamp and a glass of water. She sat up slowly and reached for it, her heart beating hard in her chest. The box was light, almost empty feeling. When she opened it she found a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, the creases worn soft from being opened and refolded many times. The paper was a letter, written in her handwriting but not in her words, not in her voice. The letter was addressed to someone named Michael, though Claire did not know anyone named Michael, had never known anyone by that name. The letter spoke about love and regret and a decision that had been made, a choice that could not be undone. It spoke about a life that could have been different, a path not taken, a door that had closed. The words were hers but they described things she had never experienced, emotions she had never felt, at least not in the way the letter described them. She read it 3 times, trying to understand, trying to find some connection to her own life. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, down to the way she crossed her T's with a slightly upward stroke and looped her lowercase g's. But the letter was not hers. Could not be hers. She had never written it. She folded it back carefully and returned it to the box and put the box in the drawer with the other objects. The drawer was getting crowded now. She was starting to avoid it, starting to feel a cold dread whenever she walked past it. She did not like looking at the objects. They made her feel strange, unsteady, disconnected from herself, like the ground beneath her was not as solid as it should be, like reality itself was becoming unreliable. But she could not throw them away. Every time she thought about it, every time she reached for the drawer with the clear intention of gathering everything and putting it in the trash and ending this, something stopped her. Her hand would freeze. Her breath would catch. The objects felt necessary somehow. They felt like they were hers, even though she knew they were not. Even though she knew they could not possibly be. At work, Claire started having trouble focusing. She would be in the middle of a task, deep in concentration, and suddenly forget what she was doing. She would be typing an email and lose her train of thought completely. Stare at the screen trying to remember what point she had been making. She would be in meetings and realize she had not heard the last 5 minutes of conversation, that people were looking at her expectantly waiting for an answer to a question she had not heard. She felt like she was trying to remember something important, something urgent, something just out of reach that if she could only grasp it would make everything clear. Her boss noticed. Her friends noticed. "Are you okay?" they asked with concern in their voices. "You seem really distracted lately. Is everything all right at home?" She told them she was fine, gave them a smile she did not feel. She told them she had not been sleeping well, which was true. She was not sleeping well at all. When she closed her eyes at night, she saw things, experienced things, lived through moments that felt absolutely real but could not be. Not quite dreams, because she was not asleep. Not quite memories, because they were not hers. Flashes of places she had never been. Moments she had never lived. She saw herself in a small apartment with slanted ceilings and exposed wooden beams, rain drumming hard on the roof, the sound filling the space, a gray cat curled beside her on a threadbare blue couch. She could feel the texture of the couch fabric under her fingers, could smell the rain and the must of old wood. She had never owned a cat. She had never lived in an apartment with slanted ceilings. But the memory felt completely real, felt like something she had experienced, something that was part of her. She saw herself walking on a beach at sunset, the sand cool and damp under her bare feet, holding hands with someone whose face she could not see, whose presence she could feel but not identify. The sky was orange and purple, the ocean calm, and she felt utterly content in a way she had never felt in her actual life. She had never lived near a beach. She had visited the ocean twice as a child and once in college, brief trips that had left no lasting impression. But this memory, this vision, it felt more real than those actual trips, more substantial, more important. She saw herself standing in a hospital corridor, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead creating a headache-inducing glare, her hand pressed flat against a closed door, afraid to open it, knowing something terrible was behind it but unable to walk away. She could hear voices on the other side, muffled and urgent. She could feel the cold metal of the door handle under her palm. She did not know what was behind the door, did not want to know. But the fear was real, visceral, consuming. The visions were getting longer, more detailed, more immersive, harder to shake off when she woke or when they finally faded. She started keeping a journal, buying a small notebook that she kept beside her bed, trying to write down what she saw as soon as it ended, trying to capture the details before they slipped away. She thought if she could document them, analyze them, find the pattern, she might understand what was happening to her. But the more she wrote, the more confused she became, the less sense anything made. The visions did not connect to each other or to her life. They were fragments, isolated moments, pieces of different lives, different versions of herself. In some of them she was happy, content, at peace. In others she was devastated, broken, drowning in grief or regret. In all of them she felt absolutely real. More real than she felt in her actual waking life. More objects continued to appear with increasing frequency. A small silver ring, delicate and worn, appeared in her coat pocket one afternoon. She reached in for her keys and her fingers closed around it. The ring was too small for any of her fingers, sized for a child or perhaps for a different hand entirely. When she held it she felt inexplicably safe, protected, like she was wrapped in something warm and secure. A blue scarf, soft cashmere now faded and pilled with age, showed up draped over the back of her dining room chair. She came home and there it was, arranged carefully as though someone had just taken it off. The scarf made her feel cold and desperately alone when she touched it, made her want to cry for reasons she could not name. A postcard from Barcelona, a city she had never visited, was wedged behind her bathroom mirror one morning. The image showed the Sagrada Familia at sunset, the spires glowing orange against a darkening sky. On the back, in her handwriting, was a single sentence. "This is where it all begins." The postcard made her feel excited, exhilarated, like she was standing on the edge of something wonderful and terrifying, about to leap into the unknown. Each object came with its own emotional weight, its own feeling that pressed down on her when she touched it, that filled her chest and made it hard to breathe. But she did not understand why. She did not understand where the feelings were coming from, what they meant, how they could be so powerful and so specific when the objects meant nothing to her, when they were not connected to any actual experience she had ever had. She started researching obsessively, spending hours late into the night on her laptop, reading everything she could find. She read about false memory syndrome, about how the brain could create entire narratives that felt true and real but were completely fabricated. She read about dissociative identity disorder, about trauma causing the mind to fracture and create separate identities. She read about depersonalization disorder, about feeling disconnected from yourself, like you are watching your life from outside your own body. She read about the psychological effects of stress, of isolation, of depression. She read about hauntings, about objects that carried residual psychic energy, about the idea that traumatic events could leave an imprint on physical things. She read about quantum theory and parallel universes and the many worlds interpretation, about the idea that every choice creates a split, a branching, and that somewhere all the other versions exist simultaneously. None of it felt quite right. None of it fully explained what was happening to her, what she was experiencing. Because the objects were not just appearing and they were not just emotionally significant. They were changing her, altering her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Every time a new object showed up, every time she touched one and felt that rush of emotion and false memory, Claire felt different afterward. Not in a way she could easily describe or point to. Not like she was becoming someone else entirely. More like she was becoming less herself. Less certain of who she was. Less anchored to her own life and her own identity. Less solid. She would look in the mirror and the face looking back would seem slightly wrong. The features not quite arranged the way she remembered them, the expression not quite hers. She would hear her own voice speaking and think it sounded strange, like someone doing an imperfect impression of her. She would move through her apartment, a place she had lived for 4 years, a space she knew intimately, and feel like a guest, like she was visiting someone else's home and trying very hard not to disturb anything or leave any trace of her presence. Her memories started to blur and fragment, becoming unreliable. She would think about her childhood, trying to anchor herself in the past, and find gaps, blank spaces where memories should have been, moments she absolutely should be able to recall but that were just gone, erased somehow. She would think about high school and remember 2 completely different versions of junior year, overlapping and contradicting, both feeling equally real and equally false. She would think about college, about her roommates and classes and relationships, and feel utterly uncertain about what had actually happened, what had really occurred. She would think about her job, the work she had done for 6 years, and feel confused about how long she had actually been there, what exactly her role was, why she had chosen this career path, what had led her to this particular life. She called her mother one Sunday afternoon, choosing her words carefully, not wanting to sound crazy, trying to gather information without revealing how lost she felt. "Do you remember that summer when I was 10 and we went to the lake?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. "Which lake?" her mother said. "We went to several over the years." "The one with the cabin," Claire said, though she realized she was not sure if there had been a cabin. "Where we stayed for 2 weeks in July." Her mother paused, and Claire could picture her in her kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear, thinking back. "I think you are remembering wrong, sweetheart," her mother said gently. "We went to your aunt's house one summer, but that was in the mountains, not a lake. And it was only for a week. You must be mixing up different trips." "Do you remember my roommate from sophomore year?" Claire asked, feeling panic rising in her chest. "The one with the red hair." "You lived alone sophomore year," her mother said with certainty. "You specifically wanted your own space. You said you needed quiet to study. Don't you remember?" But Claire did remember a roommate. She remembered late-night conversations about philosophy and art, remembered shared meals cooked badly in a tiny kitchenette, remembered inside jokes and borrowed clothes and a friendship that had felt important and meaningful. She remembered long walks across campus, remembered studying together in the library, remembered crying together over failed relationships. She remembered all of it. It was real to her. Had been real. She hung up after a few more minutes of careful small talk, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. She sat very still on her couch and tried to understand what was happening. Either her mother's memory was wrong, or hers was. Either the past she remembered had never happened, or it had been erased somehow, replaced with something else, something her mother believed was true. She did not know which possibility was more terrifying. The objects kept coming, now appearing almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day. A hairbrush with long dark strands of hair tangled in the bristles. Hair that was the exact same color as hers but somehow felt wrong when she touched it, like it belonged to someone else. A ticket stub from a movie she did not remember seeing, dated 2 years ago, creased and faded as though it had been carried in a wallet for a long time. A receipt from a restaurant in Portland, a city she had never lived in, with items she would have ordered, dated on what she thought had been a completely unremarkable Tuesday. An earring, just one, small and delicate with a tiny crack in the stone, and when she held it she felt an overwhelming sense of loss for its missing partner, for something beautiful that had been broken. She stopped trying to put them all in the drawer. There were too many now. They were everywhere, covering every surface in her apartment. On her kitchen table between the salt and pepper shakers, on her dresser next to her jewelry box, on the windowsill catching the afternoon light, on the floor by her bed where she almost stepped on them in the morning. She would gather them up carefully and put them in boxes, neat and organized, tucked away in closets. Within hours they would be back, scattered around her apartment, appearing in new places, multiplying. She would hide them under the bed, in the back of cabinets, in drawers she never opened. They would reappear on the coffee table, on the bathroom counter, on her pillow. Her apartment was slowly filling up with pieces of lives she had not lived, fragments of experiences that were not hers, objects that carried the weight of choices she had not made. And every single time she touched one, every time she picked one up or moved it or tried to put it away, she felt herself slipping further away from who she had been, felt her sense of self eroding like sand in water, felt the boundaries of her identity becoming more and more permeable. She started to have moments of complete disorientation, times when she did not know where she was or how she had gotten there. She would be walking down the street to work, the same route she had taken 5 days a week for years, and suddenly the buildings would look completely wrong, the architecture different, the trees in the wrong places, shops that should have been there replaced with different businesses she did not recognize. The sky would be the wrong color, too blue or too gray, the light falling at the wrong angle. She would stop walking and stand very still, her heart racing, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. And then, like a television changing channels, everything would snap back into place. The buildings would be correct again. The trees would be where they always had been. The sky would look normal. But the disorientation would linger, a sick feeling in her stomach, a lightness in her head, a certainty that what she had just seen had been just as real as what she was seeing now, that somehow both versions existed simultaneously. She would be at work, sitting at her desk that she had sat at for years, and suddenly not recognize the people around her. Her coworker Tom would walk by and she would look at him blankly, having no idea who he was or why he was there. She would be in a meeting and someone would refer to a project she was supposedly leading, and she would have absolutely no memory of it, no idea what they were talking about, as though she had missed weeks of her own life. She would be talking, explaining something, and use a word that did not exist, a reference to an event that had not happened in this timeline, something from one of the other lives bleeding through. Her coworkers started to worry more openly. Her friends, the few she had left, started to distance themselves. She could see it happening, could watch them pulling away, becoming less available, making excuses, and she could not stop it. She tried to explain what was happening, but the words came out jumbled and confused. She sounded unstable, delusional, like she was losing her grip on reality, like she was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe she was. Maybe that is what this was, just a garden variety mental health crisis, and the objects were hallucinations or delusions, her mind creating them to give form to some deeper psychological problem. But they felt so real when she touched them. And they were still there the next day, and the day after that. They did not disappear. They did not fade. They accumulated. One night she woke from a vision of the rain and the cat and the slanted ceiling apartment and could not get back to sleep. She lay in bed for an hour, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the building's night sounds. Finally she gave up and got out of bed and went to the kitchen for water. When she turned on the light she stopped dead, her breath catching in her throat. The room was unrecognizable. The walls were painted a soft yellow color instead of white. The cabinets were a different style, older, more traditional. The table was in a different place. The refrigerator was smaller, avocado green instead of stainless steel. Everything was wrong, rearranged, changed. She stood frozen in the doorway, her hands still on the light switch, trying to understand what she was seeing. This was not her kitchen. This was someone else's kitchen. But it was also her kitchen. She could feel it. This was a kitchen she had stood in before, had cooked in, had lived in. This was real. She closed her eyes and counted to 10, breathing slowly, telling herself this was not happening, that she was still half asleep, that this was some kind of waking dream. When she opened her eyes, the kitchen had started to shift. The walls were flickering, the yellow color fading to white and then back to yellow, oscillating between states. The cabinets were morphing, modern then traditional then modern again. The table slid across the floor, changing position, trying to find where it belonged. She watched, unable to look away, as her reality tried to settle, to find its proper shape. Slowly, piece by piece, the room shifted back to what it should be. The walls became white. The cabinets became the ones she recognized. The furniture moved back into place. The old avocado refrigerator faded away and was replaced with the correct one. But the fear stayed, sharp and cold. The knowledge stayed. She had just watched reality rewrite itself. She got a glass of water with shaking hands and went back to bed but did not sleep. She lay there until the sun came up, afraid to close her eyes. When morning came she called in sick to work and sat on her couch and tried to think through what was happening. The watch was on the coffee table. She had not put it there. It sat there ticking, steady and insistent, and she realized she had been hearing it constantly for weeks now, a background rhythm to her life, a heartbeat that was not hers. She picked it up and held it to her ear. The ticking was incredibly loud, drowning out everything else. She looked around her apartment. Every surface was covered in objects. The kitchen counter, the dining table, the coffee table, the windowsills, the bookshelf, the dresser, the nightstand, the bathroom sink, all of it crowded with things that should not be there, that had not been there before. Hundreds of objects, maybe thousands, all appearing out of nowhere, all carrying pieces of other lives, other versions of herself. And she recognized every single one of them. That was the absolute worst part. She did not remember acquiring them, did not remember these objects being part of her life in any normal way. But she recognized them. Each one felt deeply, intimately familiar, like it had always belonged to her, like she had carried it with her through years and years of living. Each one felt like it was hers in some fundamental way. She set the watch down and backed away from it slowly. She knew she needed help. She knew that whatever was happening to her was beyond her ability to handle alone. But who could she call? Who would believe her? What could she possibly say? A therapist would think she was delusional. A doctor would prescribe medication. Her friends would be concerned but ultimately helpless. Her mother would be frightened. There was no one who could understand this, no one who could help, because this was not supposed to be possible. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and scrolled through her contacts slowly. Half the names she did not recognize anymore. She had no idea who these people were, why she had their numbers, how she knew them. They were strangers with familiar names. The other half were people she knew or thought she knew, but they felt wrong somehow, like she knew them from a different context, a different version of her life, like the relationships had been different in some important way. She found her mother's number and pressed call. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6 times. Then someone answered. It was a man's voice, rough with sleep and confusion. "Hello," he said. "Who is this?" "Who are you?" Claire asked, her voice high and tight with panic. "What? Who are you calling? Where is my mother?" "I am trying to reach my mother." There was a long pause. She could hear breathing, could hear him waking up more fully. "Lady," he said finally, "I think you have the wrong number. I don't know who you're looking for, but there's no one here." "This is my mother's number," Claire said desperately. "This is her phone. Where is she?" "I have had this number for 3 years," the man said, sounding more annoyed now. "I don't know what to tell you. You have got the wrong number." "Wait," Claire said. "Please wait. Please don't hang up." But the line was already dead, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. She stared at the phone in disbelief. That was her mother's number. She was absolutely certain. She had called it 1,000 times. It was saved in her phone, in her memory, in her mind. She tried again with shaking fingers, dialing carefully, making sure she got every digit exactly right. Same number. Absolutely the same number. It rang 4 times and then a woman answered, older, annoyed at being disturbed. "Hello," she said curtly. "Mom," Claire said, relief flooding through her. There was complete silence on the other end. Then the woman spoke again, her voice wary. "I think you have the wrong number, dear. This is, wait. I'm calling for Barbara Hayes," Claire interrupted. "I am her daughter, Claire. Please, I need to talk to her." Another long pause. She could hear the woman breathing, could imagine her standing in a kitchen somewhere, confused and probably a little frightened by this strange call. "I am very sorry," the woman said slowly, "but there is no one here by that name. I don't know who you are looking for. You have reached the wrong number." And then she hung up. Claire sat holding the dead phone, staring at it like it might offer an explanation. Her mother's number. Her actual mother's number. And her mother was gone. Or had never existed. Or existed somewhere else, in some other version of reality that Claire could no longer reach. She dropped the phone and it clattered on the floor and she did not pick it up. She sat very still, her whole body trembling, trying not to completely fall apart. She went to the bathroom on unsteady legs and turned on the light and immediately wished she had not. The mirror was completely covered in small objects, arranged in a careful pattern like some kind of strange mosaic. Buttons, coins, folded pieces of paper, dried flowers, tiny keys, fragments of photographs, all pressed against the glass, overlapping, crowding for space. She swept them onto the floor with one violent motion, sending them scattering, and looked at herself in the newly cleared mirror. The woman looking back looked like her but was not her. The face was thinner, more angular. The eyes were a slightly different shade of brown, lighter somehow. The hair was the same color but longer on one side, the part in a different place. The lips were fuller. The skin was paler. Small differences, subtle changes, but they added up to someone who was not quite Claire. She reached up slowly and touched her face. Her fingers met her cheek, solid and real. In the mirror, the reflection moved with her, but the movement was delayed by just a fraction of a second, just enough to notice if you were looking carefully. She stepped back. The reflection stayed exactly where it was for a long moment before finally stepping back as well, following her motion like an echo. Then the reflection smiled. Claire did not smile. She had not smiled. But the reflection's face changed, the lips curving up, the eyes softening. The smile was sad, knowing, full of recognition and pity and something that might have been sympathy. It looked at Claire the way you look at someone you used to know, someone you have not seen in a very long time, someone you once loved but have grown distant from. It looked at her with familiarity and distance in equal measure. Claire turned and ran. She stumbled out of the bathroom, nearly tripping over the scattered objects on the floor, and went back to the living room. She turned on every single light in the apartment, flooding the space with artificial brightness, trying to ground herself in something concrete and real. But the apartment was not real anymore. It was full of objects from lives she had not lived, memories she had not made, choices she had not chosen, futures that had never arrived. And she was starting to finally understand what was happening. The objects were not random appearances. They were not hauntings or hallucinations. They were not even really objects in the traditional sense. They were anchors, tethers, connection points. Each object that appeared was an anchor to a different possible version of her life, a different choice she might have made, a different path she might have taken, a different Claire she might have become. Each one represented a branching point, a moment of decision, a fork in the road of her existence. The watch was from a life where she had stayed in her hometown, married her high school boyfriend, lived a quiet conventional life. The photograph was from a life where she had moved to the suburbs, bought a house, settled down in ways she had resisted in this version of her existence. The key was from a life where she had taken a different job, moved to a different city, become someone entirely other. Each object was real because those lives were real, existing somewhere, somewhen, in the infinite branching possibilities of choice and chance. And now they were bleeding through. Not haunting her. Replacing her. Every time a new object appeared, it was not just appearing. It was overriding something. Each watch or photograph or key or letter that manifested took something from her in exchange. Every time one showed up, a piece of her actual life, her actual memories, her actual experiences and choices, was erased and replaced with something from one of the other timelines, one of the other Claires. Her real memories, the things that had actually happened to her in this version of reality, they were being systematically overwritten. She was not being haunted by the past or by alternate lives. She was being erased by them, slowly consumed, her identity dissolving as other versions of herself pushed through, demanding space, demanding existence. And those other versions, those alternate Claires from lives that had branched off in different directions at different moments, they were just as real as she was. They had lived full lives, made their own choices, experienced their own joys and sorrows. They were her, but they were not her. They had the same origin point but had become different people through the accumulation of different experiences. And now, for reasons she could not begin to understand, the boundaries between these parallel existences were breaking down, becoming permeable, allowing the different versions to bleed into each other. And she was losing. She was the weakest version somehow, the least substantial, the one with the most uncertainty and doubt. The other Claires were stronger, more confident, more certain of themselves. They had weight, presence, substance. They had made bolder choices, lived more decisive lives, committed fully to their paths in ways she never had. And now they were coming through, taking over, pushing her aside. The apartment started to change more dramatically. The walls flickered between different colors rapidly, white to yellow to blue to green, cycling through possibilities. The furniture rearranged itself constantly, becoming new shapes and new styles. Modern then antique then modern again. The windows showed different views every time she looked, a city skyline at night, a forest thick with trees, an empty parking lot, a lush garden, a suburban street, all of them real, all of them fighting for dominance. Claire stood in the exact center of the room and watched her life cycle through infinite possibilities, reality unable to settle on what was true. She started seeing them more clearly now. Versions of herself, other Claires, appearing throughout the apartment like ghosts, but more solid than ghosts, more present. She saw one standing in the corner by the bookshelf, younger, wearing clothes Claire had never owned, reading a book Claire had never read. She saw another sitting on the couch, older, with short gray hair and tired eyes, holding a photograph and crying silently. She saw one leaning against the kitchen counter, laughing at something, talking on a phone to someone Claire did not know. They were everywhere, these other versions of herself, appearing and disappearing, walking through her space, existing in the same physical location but in different timelines, different realities. Some of them looked happy, fulfilled, content with the lives they had lived. Others looked broken, destroyed by choices and consequences. Some were successful in ways Claire had never managed. Others had failed in ways she had never experienced. But all of them, every single one, looked at her when they noticed her. Their eyes would find hers across the apartment and they would stop what they were doing and stare. Some looked at her with sympathy, with pity, understanding what was happening to her. Others looked at her with something that might have been hunger or desire or need. They wanted what she had. They wanted to be the one who was real, the one who existed in physical space, the one who got to continue. Claire tried to speak but her voice would not work. Her throat closed up tight. She tried to move but her body felt impossibly heavy, anchored in place. She was losing this battle. She could feel it happening in real time. The other versions were stronger than her in every way that mattered. They had lived fuller lives, made braver choices, experienced more. They had substance and weight. And she was just this one small uncertain Claire, this one unremarkable mediocre life, this one set of safe boring choices that had led nowhere in particular. What did she have that was worth keeping? What made her the one who deserved to stay, to continue existing, to remain real? The objects were piling up faster now, appearing so quickly she could barely track them. They materialized in midair and dropped to the floor with soft thumps, covering every surface until she could barely see the furniture beneath them. Watches. Hundreds of watches all ticking at different rates. Photographs showing different houses, different lives, different versions of happiness and sorrow. Keys of every size and shape. Letters addressed to people she had never met and people she had almost met and people she might have loved. Scarves and rings and ticket stubs and receipts and brushes and coins and buttons and flowers and books and toys and jewelry and trinkets. Thousands and thousands of objects, each one a fragment of a different possible life, each one pulling her in a different direction, each one pulling her apart. Claire fell to her knees, overwhelmed, unable to bear the weight of it all. She could not breathe. The room was too crowded, too full of possibility, too dense with alternate lives. The other Claires were pressing in closer now, their hands reaching toward her, their faces inches from hers. She could feel their breath, could see the details of their features, could recognize herself in each of them even though they were all different. They were trying to tell her something, their mouths moving, words forming, but she could not hear them over the overwhelming sound. The ticking of thousands of watches filled the air, a deafening cacophony of different rhythms, different times, all the lives she might have lived beating out their separate existences in a wall of noise. And then, in a moment of devastating clarity, she understood the final truth, the deepest truth. There was no malevolent force doing this to her. No ghost, no demon, no curse, no external threat. This was not an attack. This was just what happened when a life reached a certain point of fragility, when a person's sense of self became weak enough, uncertain enough, that the boundaries could no longer hold. The life you lived was just one possibility among an infinite number. And all around you, invisible and inaccessible under normal circumstances, the other possibilities existed too, the other versions of yourself, living in parallel, close enough to touch. Every choice you made created a branching point. Every decision split reality. Every moment offered multiple paths. And somewhere, all of those paths were real, all of those versions of you existed, living out the consequences of different choices. Most people never noticed this. Most people had strong enough senses of self, certain enough identities, that the boundaries between realities stayed solid and impermeable. They were anchored firmly in their own timeline, in their own life, unable to see or sense the alternatives. But Claire had never been certain. She had always questioned, always wondered, always looked back at choices and imagined how things might have been different. She had spent her entire life second-guessing, doubting, wishing she had chosen differently, fantasizing about other paths. And that uncertainty, that constant wondering, had weakened her boundaries, had made her permeable, had opened a door between possibilities. And now all the other Claires, all the other versions of herself from all the other timelines, were coming through that door. They were bleeding into her reality, manifesting as objects first, then as visions and memories, then as full presences. And they wanted to exist here, in physical space in her space. The ticking stopped. Suddenly. Completely. Every watch went silent at once. Claire looked up slowly, her ears ringing in the sudden quiet. The watch on the table in front of her had gone dark, its face black and empty. The hands were no longer moving. Time had stopped. Or time had run out. Or time had ceased to matter. The room went absolutely silent. And then, one by one, very slowly, the other Claires began to fade. They looked at her one last time, these women who were her and were not her, these lives she had lived and had not lived. Some of them reached out as though to touch her, as though to offer comfort or warning or farewell. And then they were gone, dissolving like mist, leaving only the faintest impression in the air. The objects remained. The apartment was still absolutely full of them, every surface covered, the floor hidden beneath layers of accumulated fragments. But the presences themselves, the other versions of herself, they had withdrawn. Claire stood up slowly on shaking legs that barely supported her weight. She walked through the apartment carefully, stepping over scattered objects, trying not to disturb them. She went to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror, looking at the woman reflected there. The woman looking back at her was her. Or at least, she looked like her. The features were the right shape, the hair the right color, the eyes the right shade. But Claire was no longer certain. She did not know if she was looking at herself or at one of the others. She did not know if she was the original Claire, the one who had started in this apartment in this timeline, or if she was one of the alternates who had successfully crossed over, who had won the battle for existence, who had claimed this space as her own. She did not know if the life she remembered was the one she had actually lived or if it was a composite, a blend of different timelines, a patchwork of different possibilities stitched together into something that felt like a coherent narrative but was actually fragments from multiple sources. She did not know who she was. And that was when the final object appeared. It materialized in her outstretched hand without warning, solid and heavy and cold. A small mirror, handheld, ornate, very old. The frame was tarnished silver, elaborate, covered in designs that might have been flowers or might have been something else, something she could not quite make out. The glass was old, slightly cloudy, with a few small cracks in the silvering. She looked into it, into the ancient glass, and saw herself. But it was not the reflection from the bathroom mirror. This was different. Clearer. More focused. More real. This Claire looked solid, substantial, certain. This Claire looked like she knew exactly who she was, like she had never doubted, never questioned, never wondered about other possibilities. This Claire looked complete. And in that moment Claire understood what she was holding. This was the choice. The final choice. The last decision she would ever make. She could look away right now. She could put the mirror down carefully, set it aside with all the other objects, walk out of this apartment, leave everything behind. She could try to rebuild some sense of self from the fragments that remained. She could choose to be the Claire who survived this, who kept going despite not knowing who she really was, who lived with the uncertainty and the confusion and the knowledge that reality was far less solid than most people believed. Or she could keep looking. She could stare into the mirror, into that clear, certain reflection, until the boundaries dissolved completely. Until she became the reflection instead of herself. Until she slipped fully into one of the other lives, one of the other timelines, and let that Claire take over, let that version become the dominant one, the real one, the one who existed in physical space. It would be easier. So much easier. It would be a relief, a release, an end to this terrible uncertainty. She would not have to carry the weight of all these unlived lives anymore, all these abandoned possibilities, all these paths not taken. She would not have to wonder. She would just be someone, even if that someone was not the person she had started as. She would just exist, certain and solid and real. Claire looked into the mirror and the reflection looked back and neither of them blinked. And slowly, carefully, with a feeling like falling, Claire began to forget. She forgot her apartment first, the layout of the rooms, the color of the walls, where the furniture went. Then her job, what she did, who she worked with, why she had chosen that particular career. Then her friends, their names and faces, the memories of time spent together. Then her mother's voice, the sound of it, the way it rose and fell, the words of comfort spoken throughout childhood. Then her childhood itself, the house she grew up in, the school she attended, the person she had been. She forgot what it felt like to be this version of herself, this particular Claire. And as she forgot, as each memory dissolved and disappeared, the reflection grew clearer and more detailed and more absolutely real. The Claire in the mirror had a whole complete life, a different life, one without all these doubts and uncertainties. And Claire could see it now, unfolding in the ancient silver surface like a film playing just for her. She could see the choices this Claire had made, the bolder decisions, the risks taken, the paths chosen with confidence. She could see the people this Claire had loved, fully and without reservation. She could see the places this Claire had been, the experiences she had gathered, the life she had built through certainty and conviction. It was a good life. Better than the one Claire had been living. Richer. Fuller. More substantial. It was a life lived with purpose and direction instead of doubt and hesitation. And it could be hers, all of it, every memory and experience and choice. All she had to do was let go of who she had been and step into who she might have been. All she had to do was surrender. Claire felt herself moving, felt the boundaries of her identity becoming fluid and permeable. Not physically moving, but moving in some other way, in some direction that did not exist in normal space. She felt herself dissolving, the edges of herself becoming less defined, and reforming, becoming someone new, becoming someone else. The boundaries between her and the reflection were blurring, becoming indistinct, impossible to define. Soon there would be no difference at all. Soon she would be the woman in the mirror, living that life, carrying those memories. And the woman she had been would be nothing but an object herself, just another fragment, just another piece of a life that had almost been lived but was ultimately abandoned. She thought, just for one last moment, about resisting, about pulling back, about refusing to let go, about fighting to remain herself despite not knowing who that self really was. But she was so tired. She had been fighting and questioning and doubting for so long. And the reflection was so clear, so certain, so real, so solid, so much stronger than she had ever been. It would be so easy to just let go and become someone who knew who they were. The mirror grew warm in her hand, the metal heating slowly. The reflection smiled, gentle and knowing and welcoming. And Claire, or the woman who had been Claire, or the woman who was about to become someone else entirely, smiled back with a sense of relief and loss and surrender. When the police found the apartment 3 weeks and 4 days later, called by a landlord increasingly worried about the unpaid rent and the lack of response to notices, it was completely empty. Not just empty of a person, empty of everything. No furniture, no clothes, no dishes, no books, no personal belongings of any kind. The walls were bare, the floors were clean, the closets were vacant. It looked like no one had ever lived there, like the space had been professionally cleaned and prepared for a new tenant. No one had seen the woman who lived there leave. No one had seen moving trucks. No one knew where she had gone. Just in the exact center of the living room, arranged on the bare floor in a perfect circle, was a massive pile of objects. Hundreds upon hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all carefully arranged and organized. Watches of every style and age, all stopped at different times. Photographs showing different houses and different lives and different versions of happiness. Keys that opened locks that no longer existed. Letters addressed to people no one could find. Scarves and rings and ticket stubs and receipts and brushes and coins and buttons and flowers and books and trinkets and souvenirs from lives that might have been lived or might have never happened. The police catalogued everything, took photographs, wrote detailed reports. And in the very center of the circle, sitting in a place of importance, was a small ornate mirror with tarnished silver frame. One of the officers picked it up, curious. He looked into it and saw his own reflection, tired and middle-aged and wearing a slightly rumpled uniform. Just for a moment, just for a single heartbeat, the reflection seemed to flicker and shift. Just for a moment he saw someone else looking back at him. A woman with dark hair and narrow shoulders, standing in an empty white apartment, holding a mirror in her hands and looking into it with an expression of wonder and terror and acceptance. She looked directly at him, though he knew that was impossible, and her eyes held knowledge and sadness and recognition. Then she was gone, replaced again by his own reflection, and he was not entirely sure he had seen anything at all. The officer put the mirror down very quickly, suddenly not wanting to touch it, suddenly feeling watched. He and his partner finished their work in silence, neither of them mentioning what he had seen or thought he had seen. They catalogued the objects, took their photographs, filed their detailed report. A missing person case was officially opened. Claire Margaret Hayes, age 32, had vanished without a trace, without explanation, without evidence of where she might have gone. Her mother was contacted and interviewed. Barbara Hayes said she had not spoken to her daughter in months, possibly longer. The exact timeline was unclear even to her. She said Claire had been struggling with something, had seemed confused and distant when they last spoke, had called once in the middle of the night talking about objects appearing in her apartment and memories that did not make sense and lives that were not hers. Barbara had assumed it was stress from work, exhaustion, maybe depression. She had told Claire to get some rest, to see a doctor if she needed to take care of herself. She had not realized how serious it was. She had not known her daughter was falling apart. She had not understood that Claire was disappearing. The case went cold within 6 months. There were no leads, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play, no indication of where she might have gone or what might have happened. Just an empty apartment that had been full and a pile of objects that seemed to belong to no one and everyone. Eventually, the objects were donated to various thrift stores and charity organizations. No one wanted to keep them. They felt wrong somehow, heavy with something unnamed, carrying emotional weight that made people uncomfortable. The objects were dispersed across the city, scattered into different stores, different bins, different collections. Most were eventually thrown away, deemed too worn or too strange to sell. But some survived. Some made their way into new homes, into new lives. And the mirror, that small ornate mirror with the tarnished frame and the clouded glass, ended up in a thrift store on the east side of the city. It sat on a shelf in the back among the dishes and picture frames for several months, overlooked, ignored, gathering dust. Until one day a young man came in looking for a gift for his girlfriend. He was 25, an artist, thoughtful and careful with his choices. He saw the mirror and thought it was beautiful in an old-fashioned way. He thought it would look perfect on his girlfriend's dresser. He bought it for $7 and took it home wrapped carefully in newspaper. His girlfriend loved it immediately when he gave it to her that evening. She held it up to the light, admiring the ornate frame, the weight of it, the sense of history it carried. She said it made her feel connected to the past, to other times, to beauty that lasted. She hung it on the wall in her bedroom where she could see it every morning when she woke up. And one morning, exactly 3 weeks and 2 days later, she noticed something strange when she got out of bed. There was a watch on her nightstand that she did not remember owning. It was silver with a scratched face, the kind of damage that comes from years of being worn, from a life lived with it strapped to a wrist. She picked it up slowly, confused, trying to remember where it had come from. The weight of it felt correct in her palm. Familiar. Right. Like it belonged there. Like it had always been hers. She could hear it ticking, steady and patient. She set it down carefully and finished getting ready for work, telling herself she would figure it out later, that there was some explanation she was missing. That night when she came home from her shift at the gallery, the watch was still there on her nightstand, exactly where she had left it. And next to it, propped against the lamp, was a photograph. Old and faded, colors yellowed with age, edges soft from handling. The photograph showed a house she had never seen before. White with blue shutters, a small porch, a lawn, a tilting mailbox. Ordinary and unremarkable. A woman stood on the porch, one hand raised to shade her eyes, face turned slightly away. The woman looked like her. Could have been her. Might be her. She could not quite tell. She picked up the photograph with trembling fingers and turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that might have been hers or might have been someone else's, were 4 words. "We were happy here." She stood very still in her bedroom, holding the photograph, hearing the watch ticking on the nightstand, feeling the mirror watching her from the wall. And she put the photograph carefully in the drawer of her nightstand and closed it firmly. She told herself there was an explanation. She told herself she would remember eventually. She told herself everything was fine. But deep down, in a place she did not want to look too closely at, in a part of herself she tried to ignore, she knew the truth. She knew the objects would keep coming. She knew they would accumulate and multiply and fill her space. She knew she would start to slip, to lose track of who she was, to forget her own memories. She knew that somewhere, in some other version of reality that existed parallel to this one, invisible but present, another version of herself was already reaching through the boundaries, already trying to cross over, already fighting for the right to exist in this space, in this body, in this life. And she knew that very soon, sooner than she wanted to think about, she would have to make a choice. She would have to decide who she would become. She would have to choose which life she would live, which version of herself would be real, or if she would let go entirely, surrender to the pull of all those other possibilities, and become just another object herself, just another fragment of a life almost lived, just another piece of something that might have been. The mirror hung on her bedroom wall, old and ornate and patient. The glass was clouded and cracked, the silver frame tarnished. And in its depths, if you looked very carefully, if you looked at just the right angle and just the right light, you could see them. All the other versions, all the other lives, all the choices that branched out from every moment, infinite and real, pressing against the boundaries of what is, trying to become what might be. The mirror waited. It had learned to wait. It had all the time in the world, and it knew that eventually everyone looks. Eventually everyone wonders. Eventually everyone questions who they are and imagines who they might have been. And when they do, when the boundaries grow weak enough, when the uncertainty becomes strong enough, the mirror is there. Waiting. Patient. Ready to offer them a choice. Ready to show them who they could become. Ready to let them slip away from themselves and into something else, something clearer, something more certain, something that feels like it might be better. The watch kept ticking in the drawer. The photograph stayed hidden in the dark. And in the morning, there would be more. There would always be more. Because once it started, it never really stopped. The objects would keep coming, one by one, day by day, each one carrying a piece of a life unlived, until there was no more room left for the life that was being lived, until the boundaries collapsed completely, until there was nothing left but fragments and possibilities and the terrible weight of choices that might have been made differently. And somewhere, in all those parallel timelines, in all those alternate realities, in all those other versions of existence, other people were finding objects too. Other versions of themselves were bleeding through. Other mirrors were waiting on other walls. The cycle continued, infinite and inexorable. Because in the end, we are all just collections of choices. And every choice creates a world. And every world wants to be real. And some of them, if you let them, if you are not careful, if your boundaries are weak enough, will find a way through. Will find a way to replace you. Will find a way to become you. And you will become nothing but a memory. A fragment. An object sitting in a drawer or on a shelf or in the center of a circle on an empty floor. A piece of a life that almost was but never quite became. The mirror knows this. The mirror remembers. The mirror waits. Always waiting. Forever patient. Because it knows that eventually, everyone wonders. Everyone questions. Everyone looks. And when they do, it will be there. Offering them the choice. Showing them who they might have been. Letting them slip away. One by one. Forever.